We're going to start off in Photoshop, and we're going to learn some of the basics of Photoshop today. So here I've got Photoshop open. I'm going to get an image to start with. So here I found a picture that I wanted to use, and I went ahead and took that image and opened it at full resolution here. You'll notice that in my image search, I pulled up tools and I changed to labeled for non-commercial reuse because I'm not selling this, but with modification because I am going to be changing the image. So I'm going to take my image and I'm going to copy it. And there's a couple different ways I can do this. I can paste my image, and since in this case it is far larger, I can go to Image, Reveal All, and that will change the size. Then I can zoom out by changing the percentage here, or I can hold the Alt key and scroll with the mouse wheel. Alternatively, I could do File, New, and choose Clipboard, and it will match the size of the image I copied. Now I want to add something else to this image. I chose to use this penguin here, again labeled for non-commercial reuse with modification. So I'm going to copy this full-size image, see the resolution there, and in Photoshop I'm going to paste that. So that is Control V, and you should notice that in the layers I have layer 1, which is my background, and then layer 2, which is my new image on top. I don't really need this background, so I'm going to trash that. And then layer 2, I'm going to remove everything that I don't want. I'm going to do that using the Quick Selection tool. The Quick Selection tool has 3 options: a new selection, add to your current selection, and subtract from your current selection. The number is the size of the brush that you use for selecting. So I'm going to go with a larger number here so I can see my circle. And I'm going to select all the stuff that I don't want to keep. And you'll see that that went a little bit too far on my penguin. I'm going to add those little pieces right there that I want to make sure that I erase. And then I'm going to subtract from the selection the parts I want to keep. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, make sure I keep his arm. Sometimes it'll take a few times of adding and subtracting to get the selection the way you want. Once I have the selection where I want it, I'm going to press Delete on my keyboard. That should just leave my penguin and his background. I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to name my layers. My penguin, I'm going to go to Edit, Free Transform. That will allow me to move him around. I can resize him by dragging the corner. I can rotate it by hovering outside the corner. I'm going to place him here. We still have the transform going on there. You can either switch to a different tool, press enter, or click the check mark to commit the transformation. So basically that resize and movement becomes finalized. This will actually also calculate all of the pixels, so if your image looks pixelated before you hit enter or click the check mark, it will look a lot better after the transformation is committed. Now my penguin in the desert needs some accessories, so I'm going to add a hat for him. So here again, looking for a non-commercial reuse with modification. I found this hat here. I'm going to copy that image, and I'm going to paste that. Alt and my scroll wheel to zoom in. Where I have quick select, I can click and hold. There's also the magic wand tool. I think the default tolerance is usually 32. That's probably a decent number. When I click here, it should get right on the edge of our hat. Then I should be able to press delete and it erase all of the white part. We'll see here it might have taken out a little bit too much. So if I go back a couple steps, I could just change my tolerance to something a little lower, maybe 24. Try that again. That looks a little bit better. Go back to edit, free transform on my hat this time. If you need something to be facing the opposite direction, you can do edit, transform, either flip horizontal to turn it the other way, or if it's upside down, you can do edit, transform, flip vertical. I think I'd like mine facing this way. So let's go back to Edit, Free Transform, which is Control T if you want to remember that. Remember, you can move with the Move tool if you need to, and you can just press the arrows once your layer is selected to move something just a little bit. I'm also going to select my background layer real quick, and I'm going to go to the Band-Aid tool, which is a spot healing brush. Resize that up a little bit. So I'm going to zoom on that, highlight it real quick with my spot healing brush. That looks pretty decent. Depending on what you have selected, sometimes it will come out just blurry like this because it's probably on Create Texture. Content Aware usually gives you something pretty decent, but you can try different options there to try and fix that. If you had multiple images put together to create a full image, you could do sample all layers, but I don't want to sample from the penguin or the hat for this, so I did not check sample all layers. So this looks halfway decent, but it looks a little out of place in this picture, and there's a couple reasons why. One of them is there's no shadow. So I'm going to fix that by taking my hat and I'm going to merge that down with the penguin so that that is all one layer. Then I'm going to duplicate that layer. I'm going to call that shadow. On my shadow layer, I'm going to go to the paint bucket tool. I'm going to change my color to black. And normally you don't want to do this, but in this case I want to get everything, so I'm going to change my tolerance as high as it will go, which is 255. So if I click on that, I will get a perfect shadow here of my penguin and his hat. So now I want to go to Edit, Free Transform, and I want to shrink this down, but I'm going to hold Shift so that only the height changes and not the width. And I want to kind of match where the shadows on the ground are. Now I want to skew it to the side. So let's go to Edit, Transform, Skew. Hit Enter to confirm that, and then I'm going to shrink it down a little bit more. Holding Shift. The shadow might actually come a little bit forward instead of backward, so let's just take it all the way past. Enter to apply. That looks okay. I need my shadow to be underneath the penguin instead of on top, covering up part of him. Now the shadow is too dark because I can't see anything through it. So here, this is only partially covering up the ground. You can still see stuff underneath it. So I need to change the opacity here. Opacity is the opposite of transparency. So if I move that too far, you can't see it anymore. So I need to move that until this matches the darkness of the other shadows in the scene. That looks okay, except that the lines on the shadow are too clean. It's not really blurry at the edges because the light's not all coming from one spot. So with my shadow still selected, I'm going to go to Filter, I'm going to go to Blur, and I'm going to go to Gaussian Blur. And then I need to choose a number that's going to make that a little bit blurry, but not so much that I lose the whole thing. Usually something in the like 1 to 5 range, depending on how high of a resolution your image is. So here it's too much because I've lost too much definition of my shadow. Obviously that is still too stark of an image. So somewhere in the middle there, I'll have a soft image that looks more natural. When I like it, I can hit OK. And the only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my penguin and I'm going to blur his layer just a little bit so that I don't have these hard edges on him, so that he seems to fit the scene a little bit better. So Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and this should be something really low. So I'm going to lower that down to just soften the edge. So probably not any higher than say 1, say 0.5. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the size on this. If I were to look at this at 100%, we'll see that this picture is actually really huge. So I'm going to go up to Image and Image Size. See if I go to pixels, that this is actually 6,000 pixels across. I'm going to aim for something around 1080p, so let's try 1920. That seems okay. That's still better than HD resolution, and our image size goes from 69 megabytes down to 7, so I'm going to hit OK. So our image is a lot smaller, but it still looks high quality, so I'm going to save that. So File, Save As, I put that in my Creative Cloud files. Make a new folder for my Photoshop files. Open that up. I'm going to name my image. And for type, I'm going to want it to be Photoshop so that I can edit it later. After I've saved a Photoshop file, I can save a separate copy if I want to make a JPEG or a PNG copy of this image. I want to maximize compatibility so that I can open this again later in case the version of Photoshop changes. So hit OK. And then the file that we saved is what we will turn into Google Classroom.